An alien woman landed in my yard with proof that I was already married to her, and I had 7 days to decide if love could cross the universe. David Chen had always been the quiet type. At 32 years old, he worked as an aerospace engineer at a research facility out in the Nevada desert. Most people would find his life boring. He spent his days staring at computer screens, analyzing data from satellites, and his nights were even quieter. He lived alone in a small cabin about 20 minutes from the facility. No wife, no girlfriend, not even a cat to keep him company. Just him and the endless desert sky. But David didn't mind the loneliness. Actually, he kind of liked it. After work, he'd grab a beer from his fridge, set up his telescope in the backyard, and spend hours looking at the stars. There was something peaceful about it. Up there, millions of miles away, whole worlds existed that nobody on Earth had ever seen. It made his problems feel small. You know, that particular Tuesday night started like any other. David came home from work, heated up some leftover pizza, and headed outside with his equipment. The desert air was cool, and the sky was incredibly clear. Perfect conditions for stargazing. He had his notebook ready to log anything interesting he might see. Around 10:30, something caught his attention. There was a light in the sky, but it wasn't moving like a plane or a satellite. It was pulsing, changing colors from blue to white, to something he couldn't quite describe. David adjusted his telescope, trying to get a better look. That's when things got weird. His equipment started going crazy. The computer screen flickered. Numbers scrolled wildly across the display, and his telescope started moving on its own. David stepped back, his heart pounding. He'd been working with this stuff for years, and nothing like this had ever happened. Before he could even think about what to do, the light in the sky grew brighter and brighter. And then it was right above his property, so intense he had to cover his eyes. The light was everywhere. David couldn't see anything else. He felt a strange tingling sensation all over his body. Like static electricity but stronger. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The light vanished. David blinked, trying to clear the spots from his vision. When he could finally see again, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There was a woman standing in his backyard. She hadn't been there a second ago. David was sure of that. He would have noticed someone walking up. But there she was, standing about 15 feet away, watching him calmly. David's first thought was to run inside and call the police, but something stopped him. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was shock. Either way, he just stood there, staring. The woman was beautiful, there was no denying that, but there was something off about her. Her features were almost human, but not quite. Her eyes were the most noticeable thing. They seemed to shift colors, like oil on water. 1 second they looked blue, then green, then something in between, and her skin had this faint shimmer to it, like she was glowing from the inside. When she moved, it was too smooth, too graceful. Like a dancer who'd practiced the same moves 1,000 times. "Hello, David," she said. Her voice was calm and clear, with an accent he couldn't place. Actually, it wasn't really an accent at all. She spoke perfect English, but there was something slightly off about the rhythm of it. David's mouth went dry. "How do you know my name?" he managed to ask. "Who are you? What are you doing on my property?" Well, the woman smiled, but it seemed like she was trying to remember how smiling worked. "My name is Lyra," she said. "I know this is unexpected, and I understand you must be frightened. But please, let me explain. I mean you no harm." "Explain what?" David's hand slowly moved toward his pocket, where his phone was. "Look, I don't know what kind of joke this is, but you need to leave. Now, this is not a joke," Lyra said. She took a small step forward, and David took a step back. She noticed and stopped moving. "I come from a planet called Erathia. It's very far from here. My people have been observing Earth for many generations. We've been watching, learning about humanity. David laughed, but it came out nervous and shaky. Right. An alien. Of course. Look, I don't know what you're on. But this isn't funny anymore. I know it's difficult to believe, Lyra said. She raised her hand, and suddenly, a small holographic display appeared floating in the air between them. It showed images of space, planets, star systems David had never seen before. But I can prove what I'm saying is true. David stared at the hologram. It looked real. Too real to be some kind of trick. His engineer brain was trying to figure out the technology. But he couldn't. This was beyond anything he'd ever seen. Okay, he said slowly. Let's say I believe you. Why are you here? Why are you in my backyard? Lyra's expression became more serious. That's what I need to explain. There's a program, David. An agreement between certain Earth governments and my people. It's been in place for decades, though very few humans know about it. It's a cultural exchange program designed to build understanding between our species. A cultural exchange program? David repeated. What does that have to do with me? You've been selected, Lyra said simply. Through a series of factors, compatibility algorithms, and what you might call cosmic coincidence, you were chosen to participate. And I was matched with you. Matched? David felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. What do you mean? Matched? Lyra's eyes shifted to a softer purple color. According to the program, David, I am your assigned spouse. I am here to be your wife. For a moment, David couldn't breathe. He just stood there, his mouth open, trying to process what he'd just heard. My wife? He finally said. You're saying you're supposed to be my wife? I didn't sign up for any program. Nobody asked me about this. The agreement was made at a governmental level, Lyra explained. Individual consent was part of the original treaty. But the selection process happens before notification. You do have a choice, though. That's why I'm here to ask you, not tell you. David ran his hands through his hair. This was insane, completely insane. This is crazy. You can't just show up and tell someone they're married to an alien. That's not how things work. I know it's overwhelming, Lyra said gently, and I understand if you want to refuse. If you choose not to participate, I will leave Earth tonight and never return. The program requires willing participation from both parties. And if I refuse, what happens then? I return to my world. The exchange is cancelled. There would be diplomatic consequences, but nothing that would affect you directly. Lyra paused. But David, I hope you'll at least consider this opportunity. Your world and mine are not so different. We can learn from each other, and the matching system is very sophisticated. We were paired because our psychologists believe we're compatible. David looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time. Despite everything weird about her, there was something in her eyes. Something genuine. She looked nervous, he realized. Even aliens got nervous, apparently. Give me a minute, he said. I need to think. Of course, Lyra said. Take all the time you need. David turned away, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to run inside, lock the door, and pretend this never happened. But another part of him, the part that spent every night looking at the stars and wondering what was out there, was curious, incredibly curious. Here was a real alien, standing in his backyard, offering him a chance to experience something nobody else on Earth knew about. He turned back to Lyra. Okay, he said. I have about 1,000,000 questions. But first, I need you to prove that this program is real. That I'm not just talking to someone who's lost their mind. Lyra nodded and pulled out what looked like a small tablet. I have documentation. Some physical, some holographic. There are contact numbers for Earth officials who handle this program. You can verify everything I'm telling you. As she began showing him the documents, David felt his world shifting. Everything he thought he knew about reality was changing, and at the center of it all was this strange, beautiful being from another world, looking at him with those color-shifting eyes. After nearly an hour of explanations, documentation, and David making 3 phone calls to government officials who confirmed the impossible, Lyra stepped closer. "I know this is overwhelming," she said softly. "And I know you need time to decide. But I want to ask you something, David. If you choose to accept this arrangement, how do you want us to begin?" David looked into her eyes and realized his answer would change everything. David didn't sleep that night. How could he? After Lyra left to stay at a government safe house while he made his decision, he spent hours pacing around his cabin. He'd pulled up every document she'd given him, verified every phone number, checked every signature. It was all real. The program existed. There were actual treaties signed by presidents he'd voted for. And somehow, impossibly, he'd been selected to be part of it. By morning, David had made his choice. He called the government liaison and told them he was willing to try. At least for a little while. He needed to see what this was all about. The official sounded relieved and told him Lyra would arrive that afternoon with her belongings. David spent the morning cleaning his cabin like crazy, which felt ridiculous. He was tidying up for an alien. His life had officially become a science fiction movie. When Lyra arrived, she carried only a small silver case. That was it. Everything she owned from another planet fit in something the size of a carry-on bag. David showed her to the spare bedroom, and she looked around with genuine interest. She touched the curtains, examined the lamp, and spent 5 minutes just looking at the window. "On Arathea, our dwellings don't have windows like this," she explained. "We use light panels that simulate any environment we choose. But this, seeing the actual outdoors through glass, it's quite beautiful." The first few days were incredibly awkward. David would wake up at 6, and Lyra would already be awake, sitting perfectly still in the living room, doing what she called meditating. Except it wasn't like human meditation. Her skin would glow faintly, and sometimes her feet would lift slightly off the ground. The first time David saw that, he spilled coffee all over himself. Eating together was another adventure. Lyra could eat human food, and she said she enjoyed it, but she didn't need to. She explained that her body could absorb energy directly from light sources, particularly sunlight. But she tried to eat with him anyway. To be polite. Watching her figure out pizza was entertaining. She kept trying to eat it with a fork and knife, very precisely, cutting it into perfect squares. "You can just pick it up," David told her, demonstrating. Lyra looked at the slice in his hand like he'd just performed magic. "You eat with your hands? Directly? It's pizza. That's how it works." She carefully picked up her slice, took a bite, and her eyes went wide. "The flavors are so intense," she said. "On my world, food is nutritional but not particularly flavorful. This is extraordinary." David couldn't help but smile. For someone from an advanced alien civilization, she was amazed by the simplest things. Over the next few weeks, he discovered this was a pattern. Lyra was fascinated by everything. She spent an hour watching ants carry food across the yard. She nearly cried the first time she heard music. Actual human music with instruments and voices. She asked 1,000 questions about everything from why humans slept so long to why dogs barked. But it wasn't just one-sided. David learned about Arathea, and it blew his mind. Lyra described cities made of crystalline structures that grew organically, technology that responded to thoughts, and a society where emotions could be shared telepathically. On her world, people didn't lie, because everyone could feel what everyone else felt. Privacy existed, but in a different way than humans understood it. "Don't you miss it?" David asked one evening while they sat on the porch. "Being able to connect with people like that?" Lyra was quiet for a moment. "Every moment of every day," she admitted. "Being here is like being deaf and blind at the same time. I can see you, hear you, but I can't feel you. Not the way I could feel my family, my friends. It's very lonely." David felt a pang of guilt. She'd given up so much just to be here, to participate in this program. "I'm sorry," he said. I can't imagine what that's like. It's not your fault, Lyra said. I volunteered for this program. I wanted to understand humans. Your species is so contradictory. You're capable of such kindness but also such cruelty. You're terrified of death but you take risks constantly. You value honesty but you lie to each other all the time. I wanted to understand why. And do you? David asked. Lyra looked at him with those shifting eyes. I'm beginning to. I think humans are lonely too. In a different way than I am. But lonely nonetheless. You're all individuals, trapped in your own minds. Trying to connect with each other but never quite succeeding. It must be exhausting. David had never thought about it that way. But she was right. Humans spent their whole lives trying to be understood, trying to make others feel what they felt, and mostly failing. Yeah, he said. I guess we are pretty lonely. That conversation changed something between them. They started really talking. Not just exchanging information but actually sharing. David told her about his parents, how they'd died in a car accident when he was in college, how he'd thrown himself into work to avoid dealing with the pain. Lyra shared stories about Arathia, about her family, about the pressure she'd felt to volunteer for this program to prove herself. One night, about 6 weeks after she'd arrived, David came home from work feeling terrible. He'd been fighting a cold all day, but by evening, it had turned into something worse. He was burning up with fever, shivering, and could barely stand. Lyra took one look at him, and her whole demeanor changed. She guided him to bed, her usual careful politeness replaced with something more direct. This is a serious infection, she said, her hand on his forehead. Your temperature is dangerously high. I'll be fine, David mumbled. Just need to sleep. No, you need help, Lyra said firmly. Let me try something. It might feel strange, but trust me. Through his feverish haze, David felt her place both hands on his chest. They were cool against his burning skin. Then something happened. A warmth spread through his body, but not like the fever. This was different, almost like electricity but gentler. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, his breathing getting easier. The pain in his chest started to fade. What are you doing? He whispered. Helping your body fight the infection, Lyra said. Her voice sounded strained. Arathian healing techniques. I'm accelerating your immune response and reducing the inflammation. Just rest. David didn't remember falling asleep. But when he woke up hours later, he felt better. Not completely healthy, but the worst of it had passed. Lyra was still there, sitting in a chair beside his bed. She looked exhausted, which was something he'd never seen before. Did you stay here all night? He asked. Yes, she said simply. I wanted to make sure you were recovering properly. Something shifted in David's chest. Not the infection, but something else. A feeling. Lyra had stayed with him, cared for him, used her own energy to heal him. She didn't have to do that. This was supposed to be a cultural exchange, basically a job for her, but she'd acted like she actually cared. Thank you, David said quietly. Lyra smiled, and this time it looked natural. You're welcome, David. That's what partners do, isn't it? They take care of each other. Partners. The word hung in the air between them. Up until that moment, David had been thinking of this as a temporary arrangement. A year-long program he'd agreed to out of curiosity. But looking at Lyra now, seeing the exhaustion on her face from staying up all night to help him, he realized something. This was becoming real. 3 months passed, and David's life had transformed in ways he never expected. The awkwardness with Lyra had faded into something comfortable. They had inside jokes now. She'd learned to appreciate terrible action movies, though she always pointed out the logical inconsistencies. He'd learned to appreciate silence with someone else present, which was something he'd never experienced before. On Arathia, Lyra explained, silence between people who cared about each other was considered intimate. Comfortable, quiet, meant trust. His colleagues at work had noticed changes in him. Tom from engineering mentioned it during lunch one day. You seem different lately, he said. Happier. You seeing someone? David nearly choked on his sandwich. Something like that? He said carefully. He couldn't exactly explain that he was living with an alien as part of a secret government program. It's complicated. Isn't it always? Tom laughed. Well, whoever she is, she's good for you. David thought about that conversation on his drive home. Lyra was good for him. She challenged him to think differently, to see the world from angles he'd never considered. She pointed out how humans wasted so much time worrying about things they couldn't control. How they made themselves miserable comparing their lives to others. How they were so focused on the future or the past that they forgot to experience the present. Like right now, she'd told him once while they were watching the sunset. This moment will never exist again. This exact combination of light, temperature, the way the wind feels. It's unique. And you're thinking about work tomorrow instead of experiencing it. She was right. David had spent so much of his life in his own head that he'd forgotten how to just be present. Lyra was teaching him that, even if she didn't realize it. The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon. David had decided to take Lyra on a road trip to the Grand Canyon. She'd seen pictures, but he wanted her to experience it in person. The drive took about 4 hours, and they spent it listening to music and talking. Lyra had discovered she loved classic rock. Something about the guitar riffs fascinated her. When they finally arrived and walked to the canyon's edge, Lyra stopped walking. She just stood there, completely still, staring at the massive expanse before them. David watched her, trying to see it through her eyes, the layers of red and orange rock, carved by millions of years of erosion, stretching as far as the eye could see. David, Lyra said softly. Her voice sounded strange. I need to sit down. Are you okay? He guided her to a bench. Concerned. Her skin had lost some of its shimmer. I'm fine, she said, but tears were running down her face. It's just overwhelming. On Arathia, we have beautiful places, but nothing like this. The scale of it, the time it represents, the raw power of nature. I can feel it. Feel it? Lyra placed her hand over her heart. My people are sensitive to energy, to the essence of places. This canyon, it's ancient. I can feel the weight of all that time. All that change. It's beautiful and terrifying at the same time. David had never thought about the Grand Canyon that way. To him, it was impressive, but ultimately, just a geological formation. Seeing Lyra's reaction made him see it differently. This wasn't just rock and space. It was history, written in stone, telling a story that started long before humans existed and would continue long after they were gone. They sat there for over an hour, just watching the light change as the sun moved across the sky. Lyra eventually calmed down, but she kept holding David's hand. He realized she'd never done that before. Not like this, not casually, just because she wanted to. It felt significant. On the drive back, Lyra was quieter than usual. David kept glancing at her, wondering what she was thinking. Finally, about halfway home, she spoke. David, can I ask you something personal? Sure, he said, keeping his eyes on the road. Do you resent this situation? Being matched with me without your choice? Having your life changed by decisions other people made? David thought about it carefully. Honestly? At first, yeah. I was angry. It felt like someone had hijacked my life. But now? No. He paused. I don't know what I'd be doing if you hadn't shown up. Probably the same thing I was doing before. Coming home to an empty house, looking at the stars alone, slowly turning into one of those bitter old men who don't talk to anyone. You wouldn't have become that, Lyra said. You're too kind. Maybe. But I was lonely, Lyra. I just didn't realize how lonely until I wasn't anymore. David took a deep breath. What about you? Do you regret volunteering for this? Lyra was quiet for a long moment. I regret the cost, she said finally. Being cut off from my people. The telepathic connection. That pain doesn't go away, but being here, learning about Earth, learning about you. That part, I don't regret. Just that part? David asked, half joking. Lyra turned to look at him. I'm experiencing something my people rarely feel, she said. Uncertainty. On Arathia, relationships develop naturally through emotional connection. We know what the other person feels at all times. But with you, I have to guess. I have to interpret your words, your expressions, your actions. It's frustrating but also exciting. Every day I discover something new about you. What have you discovered? David asked. That you're braver than you think. That you use humor to avoid difficult emotions. That you care deeply about people, but you're afraid to show it because you've been hurt before. That you make this little sound in your sleep, almost like a sigh, when you're having a good dream. Lyra smiled. Should I continue? David felt his face getting hot. You've been paying attention. Of course I have, Lyra said. That's what you do when someone matters to you. The word hung in the air. Matters. David's heart was beating faster. Do I? Matter to you, I mean? Lyra reached over and touched his arm gently. More than I expected. More than I should, perhaps, given this is supposed to be a temporary cultural exchange. But yes, David, you matter to me very much. David pulled the car over to the side of the road. They were in the middle of nowhere, with desert stretching in all directions. He turned to face Lyra completely. I need to tell you something, he said. I'm falling in love with you. I know that's probably crazy, and maybe it's just because you're exotic and different. Or maybe it's some kind of Stockholm syndrome or whatever. But it's true. I think about you constantly. I worry about you. I want to make you happy, and I don't know what to do with that. Lyra's eyes shifted through a dozen colors in rapid succession. You love me? She whispered. Even though I'm not human? Even though this situation is impossible? Maybe because it's impossible, David said. I don't know. All I know is what I feel. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they'd settled on a deep violet color he'd never seen before. On my world, we have a tradition, she said. When someone confesses deep feelings, we respond not with words but with what we call a resonance, a sharing of our emotional state. Would you let me try? With you? How does it work? David asked. I need to touch you. Your hands, your face, and you need to trust me completely. It won't hurt, but it will be intense. You'll feel what I feel, just for a moment. Not thoughts, but emotions. David nodded. Okay, I trust you. Lyra placed both her hands on the sides of his face, her palms warm against his skin. For a second, nothing happened. Then it hit him like a wave. He could feel her loneliness, the aching emptiness of being cut off from her people. But underneath that was something else. Warmth, joy, fear, hope, and something that felt like love, but not quite. It was more complex than that, more layered. It was care and fascination and desire and gratitude all mixed together into something he didn't have a word for. When Lyra pulled her hands away, David was breathing hard. That was... He started, then stopped. I don't know what that was. That was how I feel about you, Lyra said softly. I can't call it love because I'm not sure I understand human love. But it's close. Very close. You've become important to me, David. Essential, even. David pulled her into a hug, something they'd done a few times but always awkwardly. This time felt different. This time she wrapped her arms around him and held on tight, and David realized they'd crossed some invisible line. They weren't just participants in a program anymore. They were something else, something neither of them had planned for. They sat there for a while, holding each other on the side of a desert highway, two beings from different worlds who'd somehow found each other. When they finally started driving again, David reached over and took Lyra's hand. She squeezed back, and neither of them let go until they got home. Life got complicated fast. About 2 weeks after their trip to the Grand Canyon, 3 ships appeared in the sky above David's property. They were smaller than the one Lyra had arrived in, but still impressive. hovering silently in the darkness. David and Lyra were in the kitchen when the ships arrived. The lights flickered, and Lyra's face went pale. "No," she whispered. "They're not supposed to be here yet." "Who?" David asked, though part of him already knew. "My people. They're here to take me home." The next few minutes were a blur. A delegation of 5 Arathians materialized in the backyard, all wearing formal robes that seemed to shimmer like liquid metal. The leader, an older male with silver markings on his face, spoke in a language David couldn't understand. Lyra responded in the same language, her voice getting louder, more desperate. Finally, she switched to English, probably for David's benefit. "You can't do this," she said. "The program is supposed to last a year. It's only been 4 months." The leader's expression was stern. "The program has been terminated, Lyra. The council has decided that cultural exchange with humans is too risky. All operatives are being recalled immediately." "Risky?" Lyra's hands were shaking. "What happened?" "Political changes on Arathia. A new faction has gained control of the council. They believe contact with primitive species weakens us, makes us vulnerable." The leader glanced at David with something that might have been disdain. "You have 1 week to prepare, then you will return home." David stepped forward, his fear replaced by anger. "She's not property. You can't just take her." "We are not taking her," the leader said coldly. "We are recalling a citizen of Arathia who volunteered for temporary service. Her obligation is to her world, not to you." After the delegation left, promising to return in 7 days, Lyra collapsed into a chair. David knelt beside her, taking her hands. "What are we going to do?" "There's nothing we can do," Lyra said, her voice hollow. "I'm bound by Arathian law. If I refuse to return, there will be consequences for my family, for everyone who supported my participation in the program." "There has to be a way," David insisted. "Can you ask for more time? Can you appeal to someone?" Lyra shook her head. "You don't understand. The new council. They're isolationists. They think any connection with humans is contamination. If I fight this, it will only make things worse." The next 7 days were the worst of David's life. He tried everything. He called the government officials who'd confirmed the program, but they were helpless. The treaties gave Arathia the right to recall their people at any time. He looked into legal options, but Lyra wasn't technically on Earth legally. She existed in a diplomatic gray area that no lawyer wanted to touch. Meanwhile, he and Lyra tried to make the most of the time they had left. David showed her everything he'd been saving for later. They drove to the lake, where he'd fished with his father as a kid. They watched 3 movies in one night. They stayed up until dawn talking about everything and nothing. Lyra recorded everything on a small device she said would let her keep these memories, even after she went through the recalibration process. "Recalibration?" David asked. It was the 3rd day, and they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. "You haven't mentioned that before." Lyra's hand tightened around his. "When I return to Arathia, I'll have to undergo emotional recalibration. It's a process that removes strong attachments formed with non-Arathians. The council believes that operatives who've spent time with humans need to be cleansed of emotional contamination before they can reintegrate into society." David felt like he'd been punched. "They're going to erase your memories of me?" "Not erase," Lyra said quietly. "But they'll dull them. Remove the emotional connection. I'll remember facts, events, but I won't feel what I feel now. It's considered necessary for my mental health." "That's not mental health," David said, his voice rising. "That's brainwashing." "It's our way," Lyra said. "And I agreed to it when I volunteered for the program." David stood up, pacing. "So that's it? You're just going to let them do this? Turn you into someone who doesn't care?" "I don't have a choice," Lyra said, and now she was crying. "Don't you think I wish there was another way? Don't you think I want to stay here with you? But if I refuse, my family will be punished. They could lose their social standing, their positions. My younger sister is studying to be a healer. If I dishonor the family, she'll be expelled from the program." David sat back down, his anger draining away. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know you're in an impossible situation. I just hate that we finally found something real, and it's being taken away." "Me too," Lyra whispered. On the fifth night, David couldn't sleep. He got up around 2 in the morning and found Lyra standing in the backyard, looking up at the stars. He walked out to join her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "I don't want to waste time sleeping," Lyra said. "I only have 2 more nights here. I want to remember everything." They stood in silence for a while. Then Lyra said something that changed everything. "David, I need to tell you something. Something I've been keeping from you because I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do." "What is it?" "I have a choice," Lyra said slowly. "One I didn't tell you about because I wasn't sure if I could actually make it. I can request asylum on Earth. If I do, I would be renouncing my citizenship on Arathia. I could never go home again, never see my family, never feel the telepathic connection with my people. I would be alone, truly alone, for the rest of my life." David's heart was racing. "But you could stay?" "Yes, I could stay here with you. The Earth government would grant me asylum. But David, you need to understand what that means. I would be giving up everything. My family, my world, my identity. I would be neither Arathian nor human, just someone in between, belonging nowhere." "You'd belong here," David said. "With me." "Would I?" Lyra turned to face him. "What if you change your mind? What if in a year, or 5 years, you meet a human woman and realize you'd rather be with her? I would have given up my entire world for a relationship that might not last." David had thought about this exact scenario 100 times over the past few days. "I can't promise you forever," he said honestly. "I'm human. I'm flawed. I make mistakes. But I can promise you that right now, in this moment, I want you to stay. I love you. Not because you're exotic or different, but because you're you. Because you make me see the world differently. Because you care about ant colonies and cry at sunsets and stay up all night to heal me when I'm sick." "That's not enough," Lyra said, but her voice was uncertain. "Then what is?" David asked. "What would be enough for you to stay?" Lyra was quiet for a long time. "I need to know that you understand what you're asking. If I stay, there will be consequences. The Arathian Council will be furious. They might send others to try to retrieve me. Earth's government might not be able to protect us. And I'll be in constant pain from the isolation, from being cut off from my people. Can you handle that? Can you handle being with someone who might wake up every day, grieving for a connection she can never have again?" David took her hands. "I don't know," he said truthfully. "But I want to try. If you're willing to give up everything for a chance at this, then I'm willing to work through whatever challenges come with it." Lyra closed her eyes. "You're asking me to choose between my family and you." "No," David said firmly. "I'm not asking you to do anything. This has to be your choice. Completely yours. I'll support whatever you decide, even if it means watching you leave. But if you want to stay, if some part of you wants to build a life here, then I'm telling you I'll be here." They stood there in the darkness, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Finally, Lyra opened her eyes. They'd settled on a color David had never seen before. A deep amber that seemed to glow from within. "I want to stay," she whispered. "I'm terrified, and I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, but I want to stay." David pulled her into his arms, and she held onto him like he was the only solid thing in a shifting universe. Which, David realized, he kind of was. She was about to give up everything she'd ever known for a chance at something new. The least he could do was be her anchor. The next morning, Lyra contacted the Arathian delegation and told them her decision. The leader was coldly furious, calling her a traitor, telling her she was making the biggest mistake of her life. The Earth government officials were surprised but quickly moved to grant her asylum. Apparently, having an Arathian permanently on Earth was politically valuable. When the ships left 2 days later, they left without Lyra. David and Lyra stood in the backyard, watching them disappear into the sky. Lyra was crying, quiet tears that ran down her face without stopping. David just held her, knowing there was nothing he could say that would make this easier. "I can't feel them anymore," Lyra said after the ships had gone. "Before, even when I was here, I could sense my people in the distance. A faint connection, but now they've closed the link. I'm completely alone." "You're not alone," David said. "I'm here. Lyra looked at him, her eyes red from crying. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that even when this gets hard, even when I'm difficult to live with because I'm grieving, you won't regret this. That you won't wish you'd let me go." David cupped her face in his hands. "I promise. We'll figure this out together." The first few months after Lyra's decision were harder than either of them had expected. She'd been right about the grief. Some days she'd wake up and just sit in the corner of the room, her skin barely glowing, almost gray. She explained that on Arathia, emotions were shared and processed collectively. Being cut off from that network felt like missing a limb, an ache that never went away. David did his best to help. He learned to recognize the bad days and give her space when she needed it. He'd sit nearby, not talking, just being present. On better days, he'd take her to new places. They went to the ocean for the first time, and Lyra spent hours walking along the beach, collecting shells and watching the waves. She said the ocean reminded her of Arathia's crystalline seas, and being near it helped ease the loneliness. The government situation was complicated. There were officials who wanted to study Lyra, to learn everything they could from her. David had to fight to protect her privacy, to make sure she wasn't treated like a lab specimen. Eventually, they reached a compromise. Lyra would share her knowledge of Arathian science and culture, but only in ways she was comfortable with, and she'd be compensated fairly for her time. It turned out Lyra's knowledge was incredibly valuable. She helped Earth scientists solve problems they'd been working on for decades. She introduced concepts in physics and biology that opened up entirely new fields of research. She did it all quietly, never seeking credit, just wanting to contribute and feel useful. David quit his government job to avoid any conflicts of interest. With his experience and the money Lyra was earning from her consultations, they could afford it. He started working as a private aerospace consultant, which gave him more flexibility. They moved to a small coastal town in California, somewhere quieter where Lyra could be near the ocean, and where they'd have more privacy. Their relationship deepened in ways David hadn't expected. Without the telepathic connection she was used to, Lyra had to learn to communicate the human way. At first, it was frustrating for her. She'd assume David understood what she meant, then get upset when he didn't. But gradually, she learned. She learned to say when she was sad, when she needed comfort, when she wanted to be alone. And David learned to read her in other ways. The subtle shifts in her skin's glow, the way her eyes changed color with her moods. About 6 months after the ships had left, something unexpected happened. Lyra had been feeling unwell for a few weeks. Nothing serious, just tired and nauseous. David wanted her to see a doctor, but she refused, saying Arathian biology was too different. Eventually, she agreed to let a government medical specialist examine her, someone who'd been studying the limited information they had about her species. The doctor ran tests for 3 days. When the results came back, she called David and Lyra into her office, with an expression that was equal parts shock and excitement. "You're pregnant," she told Lyra. For a moment, neither of them could speak. Finally, David found his voice. "That's not possible. You said our species weren't compatible." "I said they shouldn't be compatible," the doctor corrected. "But life has a way of surprising us. The genetic differences are substantial, but apparently not insurmountable. The fetus appears to be developing normally, though we'll need to monitor this carefully. This is completely unprecedented." Lyra's hand went to her stomach. "I can feel it," she whispered. "There's a presence inside me. It's faint, but it's there." The pregnancy was difficult. Lyra's body was adapting to something it wasn't designed for. She had pain. She was exhausted constantly. and there were moments when David was terrified they might lose both her and the baby. But Lyra was determined. She said that this child, this impossible combination of two worlds, gave her a purpose beyond her grief. The government provided the best medical care available. They assembled a team of doctors, geneticists, and specialists to monitor the pregnancy. It became a scientific event, though everyone involved agreed to keep it quiet. The world wasn't ready to know about Lyra yet, and certainly wasn't ready for a human-alien hybrid. David quit consulting to stay home with Lyra. He read every book about pregnancy he could find, even though most of it didn't apply. He cooked her favorite foods, rubbed her back when she was sore, and talked to her stomach every night. Telling their unborn child about Earth and Arathia, about their parents who came from different worlds but found each other anyway. The birth was intense. Lyra's body gave off light during contractions, so bright that the delivery room looked like it was full of spotlights. The baby arrived just before dawn on a Tuesday morning. When the doctor held her up, everyone in the room went silent. She was perfect. Tiny and beautiful, with skin that had just a hint of Lyra's shimmer, and eyes that shifted between brown and violet. She had David's nose, and Lyra's delicate features. When she cried, it sounded completely human, and David felt something in his chest break open. They named her Maya. Lyra said it meant miracle in an ancient Earth language, and David agreed. She was a miracle. Proof that even the most impossible things could happen if you were willing to believe. Maya changed everything. Lyra's grief didn't disappear, but it had somewhere to go now. She poured all that love she'd lost when she left her people into their daughter. And David discovered that being a father was both terrifying and amazing. This tiny person depended on them completely, and they had no idea what they were doing half the time. Maya developed quickly. By 6 months, she was doing things most human babies couldn't do. Her eyes had settled into a pattern, shifting colors based on her mood. When she was happy, they were bright blue. When she was upset, they went dark purple. She could sense emotions in a limited way, something she'd inherited from Lyra. When David was sad, baby Maya would cry until he held her, as if she could feel his distress. The Arathian government's reaction was unexpected. When they learned about Maya's existence, instead of being angry, something shifted. A new faction gained influence on Arathia, one that saw Maya as proof that the isolationists were wrong. If humans and Arathians could create new life together, they argued, then the two species weren't as different as everyone claimed. 2 years after Lyra had chosen to stay on Earth, an Arathian ship arrived with an unexpected message. The Council wanted to open diplomatic relations. Real relations, not secret programs. They wanted to meet Maya, to study what her existence meant for both species, and they wanted to give Lyra a choice. She could return home for a visit, with full immunity, to see her family again. Lyra cried when she heard the news. "They want to see me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "After everything? They want to see all of us," David corrected, reading the message. "As a family. They're calling us ambassadors of a new age of cooperation." The visit to Arathia was scheduled for the following year. In the meantime, David and Lyra focused on their life together. They bought a house near the beach. A small place with big windows, and a yard where Maya could play. David taught at the local university, sharing his knowledge with the next generation of engineers. Lyra continued her consulting work, now focused on helping humanity prepare for formal first contact. On Maya's 3rd birthday, they had a small party in their backyard. Just the 3 of them, some cake, and presents. Maya was fascinated by her birthday candles, the way the flames danced. Her eyes shifted through a dozen colors as she watched them. When it was time to blow them out, she looked up at her parents with a huge smile. "Make a wish, sweetie," David said. Maya closed her eyes tight, then blew out the candles with all her might. When she opened her eyes, she looked at David and Lyra with an expression far too wise for a 3-year-old. "I wish that we'd always be together," she said simply. David felt tears welling up. "That's a good wish," he managed to say. That evening, after Maya was asleep, David and Lyra sat on their porch watching the stars. It had become their ritual, a way to end each day. Lyra still looked up at the sky with longing sometimes, but less often now. She had a life here, a family, a purpose. "Do you ever regret it?" David asked. It was a question he'd asked before, but he needed to keep asking. "Staying here?" Lyra thought about it, really thought about it. "I regret the cost," she said slowly. "Missing my family. The years I lost with them. The pain of being disconnected. Those things don't go away. But the choice itself? No. I don't regret it. How could I regret something that gave me you and Maya? Even on the bad days?" David pressed. "Especially on the bad days," Lyra said. "Because on those days, you were there. You didn't try to fix everything or make it better. You just stayed. That's what love is, I think. Not the easy moments, but the hard ones where you stay anyway." David took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. 5 years ago, he'd been alone in the desert, looking at the stars and wondering if there was more to life. Then Lyra had appeared and asked him a simple question. "How do you want us to begin?" He'd chosen curiosity over fear. He'd chosen possibility over safety, and it had led to this: a family that shouldn't exist, a love that crossed the boundaries of worlds, a future that neither of them could have imagined. "You know what's funny?" David said. "That first night, when you asked me how we should begin, I had no idea what to say. But now I think I understand the question better." "What do you mean?" Lyra asked. "It wasn't really about that first moment," David said. "It was about all the moments that would come after. Every morning we wake up next to each other. Every meal we share. Every time Maya does something amazing. We're still beginning. Every single day. And I want to keep choosing to begin with you." Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder. That was surprisingly poetic for an engineer. "I've been practicing," David admitted, and they both laughed. Inside the house, Maya stirred in her sleep. David could see her through the window, curled up with the stuffed alien toy Lyra's sister had sent from Arathia. She was a bridge between two worlds, proof that different didn't mean incompatible. She represented a future where humans and Arathians could work together, learn from each other, maybe even build something new. But more than that, she was just their daughter. A little girl who loved ice cream and hated bedtime, who asked a million questions and gave the best hugs. A child who would grow up knowing that love wasn't limited by biology, or distance, or even planets. "We should get some sleep," Lyra said eventually. "Maya will be up early, and she'll want pancakes." "The ones with the chocolate chips?" David asked. "Is there any other kind?" Lyra smiled. They went inside together, checking on Maya one more time before heading to bed. As David was falling asleep, he felt Lyra's hand find his in the darkness, squeezing gently. No words were needed. They'd built a language of their own over the years, one that transcended the differences between human and Arathian. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance across the sky. Somewhere up there was Arathia, where Lyra's family was preparing to meet the granddaughter they'd only seen in pictures. Somewhere up there were countless other worlds, other species, other possibilities. But here on Earth, in a small house by the ocean, a family slept peacefully. A family that had begun with an impossible question and had answered it with impossible love, and tomorrow they would begin again.